You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Everybody, this is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and I'm very excited to have Besa Tetova here on the show. Photographer, model, artist. We're going to chat art, but can we start with photography? Besa, I love photography. What does photography do? It catches your eye, right? So I saw both your modeling and your photography, and it caught me. And the photography itself, that feel, that snapshot feel, the Polaroid. As something about photography, the instant aspect of it that pulled me in. But
yeah.
So talk about. Let's talk about. Tell us about your photography and what you do artistically and creatively.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the compliment. My photography really started, I think, as a child. My dad was he was a little bit obsessed, and he took a lot of photos of me. And I think even as a child, I started picking up on things where he'd be like, oh, no, move this way. And sort of how people frame things. And then in college, I started getting more into it and experimenting and working with local film kids. And I started to kind of ask questions more. And I was like, so, what goes into this? How do you see a shot? Because I think photography is just about your own perception in one snapshot of a moment in time. And I think everybody has their own unique perspective and their own vision. For me, I really like nostalgia. I like to play on nostalgia. So I like to kind of have this aesthetic that makes you kind of question when was this taken?
Yeah.
It just makes you pause a little bit to wonder about it. And I also really like the fact that with film, you really have to slow down and you have to kind of be more thoughtful because you only have 36 frames in a roll of film, usually. So it's kind of you can't just snap off 1,000 photos like you can with a digital camera.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to cherry pick. You have to be let's move this, or here, this lighting isn't quite right. It's not quite what I was looking for. Let's switch this pose up. And I think just kind of over time, your eye becomes trained. And I think for me, especially, I learned so much about photography through watching movies, through cinematography. And Sofia Coppola is a big inspiration to me.
Yeah.
I like that in her films, she builds these worlds and there's so much attention to detail. And she kind of makes you nostalgic for something that you didn't really experience, because a lot of her movies are set in different times. And I wanted to kind of try to replicate that feeling when you look at my photos.
Yeah, when you said about trying to place it in time, I like that because it's something that disrupts the brain a bit, right? Because I'm looking at it too, right? And for me, my first contact with photography, because I'm in my early 50s, so when it comes to the snapshot itself, or let's save 2 pictures for the end of the party because there's a physical limitation on how much film is there, right? A whole different way of approach and thinking. And I'd say my dad really influenced me with the Super 8 camera. I couldn't love. I actually still have it, and I've used it. So my pops got that for me. He got it because I had a little kiddo in the early 70s, right? To capture everything that's going on. And I later on used it to do some just some fun filming, 3-minute rolls in Minneapolis at the time, old buildings, that type of stuff, which Super 8, right?
Awesome.
Yeah. And what's really cool is I have the projector and I can project films of myself when I was 18 months.
That's amazing. I've
Yeah.
like that happened just in movies, and I'm like, oh my God, I would love to be able to sit down and watch somebody's childhood, like just projected from like a Super 8, because like the way that film is so incredible, and the way that like it expresses just kind of like this warmth when you're viewing it,
Yeah.
it's beautiful.
It yeah, let's stick on Super 8 for a bit. When you run it, there's a smell that comes out of that projector.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a little fume or something. It's some sort of chemical or something, and the heat and it runs and it kind of pulls that in as well. And there was some Super 8. I don't know how it worked. All I know is this is the Super 8 that is either in color or in black and white, and no sound, right? So what's funny
Yeah.
too is that when I was a kid, my dad would play them, and he ended up creating his own narration. So they'd be like these silent films or films of us, and I know what he would say because he would narrate the thing because there's no sound, and it was so radically different of a way to kind of interact. And digital is fantastic. I mean, this is,
Oh, absolutely.
oh my gosh, the things you can do, and we could talk about that. But
Mhm.
it's just a difference of the experience, and there's this familiarity or something you said, or this closeness or something like that
Yeah.
about the intimacy or something with the Super 8. So we're two big Super 8 fans. Well, that's
Huge. I
yeah,
think this the way that like you kind of have to use imagination a little bit. With like you were saying, like your father narrated it. And so it's like that's kind of something that you'll associate with watching that. You'll
oh yeah,
also associate the smell. And it's like it's such a full sensory experience. Whereas like obviously digital is too, and there's so much we can capture. And that's great for certain things. But I think sometimes, like, just the nostalgia alone, just like the sentimentality of it all, just really can't be beat, in my opinion.
yeah. What do you think about that feeling? I'm always fascinated by the feeling of nostalgia, right? Because like people
Mhm.
say it a lot, and it's this weird kind of concept where there's like deep warmth in feeling and nostalgia is the absence or being away from a home. I think is the roots of the word is away from home. Um, so it's always twisted when I talk to people about nostalgia because some people are like, oh, like I feel so good. I'm going to watch this for a while because I feel that way. And others are like, I'm drifting away to something that doesn't exist. Like it's kind of a weird. Can you tell me a little bit about how you think about like nostalgia or in the fact that you have your photography kind of create that?
So I think I've kind of always been somebody who was like just prone to feelings of nostalgia, even when I was younger. I think that might be a generational thing. I think we millennials are very nostalgic creatures.
Yeah,
I think nostalgia, to me, the way I feel it in my body is like it's like a pulling. It's like this feeling that is pulling me toward something, not usually away. And there's like kind of a warmth that like radiates throughout your
yeah,
body, but also just kind of this like little piece that's like longing for something. And I think that with photography, it's an excellent medium to explore nostalgia because one, you can use like different props, sets, like the whole set design and that aspect of it, sure. But I think also like you can get down to like so many minute details with like hair and makeup and clothing and even posing. Like,
yeah,
you know, because everything has its own context in time. And I think sometimes it's really cool to pull from different parts of time, but things that are kind of like well known enough to where somebody would recognize it and try to put it all in one photo because it really confuses this concept that we have of time in
yeah,
that um it's like all of these things that are just in one one snapshot that don't necessarily correlate like linear in time. And I think that's really fun because I think it's interesting to explore time as like a social construct and an artistic construct. The way that like we do flash forwards and flash backwards and like movies and film and in writing and literature. And I think you can explore it in photography too, and I think it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I love those, philosophy, right? Philosophy, art and philosophy show, right? Like
Mhm.
time and like displacement. One of the things I have this a habit, which most everybody who knows me finds curious, but I think loves about me is I
Mhm.
was about 10 years ago. I had a female friend and I found myself looking through her like fashion mags, right? And like I was like, thrilled, right? But there was all these cultural pieces around it, even then, where I was like, I don't know, like people look at me weird. I got a stack, I get the Fall Vogue, and I get all this stuff, right? But me, I lived away, but it's always become more comfortable. So I did that, and what I found is there's something about the nostalgia piece that always seems to be there because within fashion and new fashion stuff, I look at a photo, a beautiful photo, and like the dress on the woman is like, is this 1979? Is this 2022? Or,
Yeah.
like, and
Mhm.
it's modern, right? And it's fashion and it's new, but it's that same type of thing where it messes with your head or like, you see this shot with like galoshes and stuff like that. And then like,
Yeah.
it's like, what is this? And is this right now or is it
Mhm.
78 or something? I love that displacement.
Yeah. I think fashion's a really great medium to kind of explore the idea of like time being cyclical because the way that it comes back, like trends come back in like, a 10-year, 20-year like time frame. Whereas what you were saying, like you would see a photo in a magazine from like 20 years ago and you could walk down the street and potentially see like that same outfit on someone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that is really like, it's something we talk about, but I don't think it's something we really acknowledge as much as we should, because I think that that doesn't only apply to fashion. I think there are so many other different avenues where we find that like the past is not only repeating itself, but it's also like imprinting on the future in a way.
I love it. I found that I don't get to drop into fashion too much on the show, although, I try to, but I
Mhm.
found this weird little wrinkle that some of my favorite painters, because I adore painting, I lose my brain for painting, and that they were also really into fashion. And I think in looking at what they did, a lot of time it was like connected to form and material and like the depiction of that. But it was of quality I never expected, like that I was seeing maybe something in their painting and their background. What it really electrified me is that they had a background or eye towards fashion. So it melded it in my head because you think of fashion of kind of, it's always changing, right?
Mhm.
It'll float away where a painting is, ideally there forever,
Definitely.
and more permanent.
Mhm.
I like that interplay. Let me ask you one of the big ones here because we could talk about a lot of things. But what is art? I mean, we're talking, art, photography, all this great stuff. Like for you, Bessa, what is
I
what is
think
art?
I think art is anything that connects to your own inner experience, like either your emotions or just like something that is triggered inside of you when you look at anything. I think it's great that art is so subjective because I believe that there is a niche for everyone and that there is an a s- not just an aesthetic, but we all have like our own visual like tastes because we are visual people. We live in a visual world. And at least for me, art is just something that when I look at it, there is something that's pulling at me to examine it within.
I like that because it's the thinking part of it. I
Yeah.
say always that like I don't know if my show sometimes is a variety show, an art show, a philosophy show, but ever since I started, when I looked at art, for me, it was the same experience of philosophy, being like, how the hell do I explain this? Like,
Yeah.
what are the words like? Like what are the words to say what that is, or why? Like, not an emotional person, not prone to cry, very comfortable with crying, but how is it that when I look at a particular painting, like it's a reaction like that? Like each time, like what is contained in that, as the philosopher and thinker, we're talking about it. Like, where's the thing that causes that in me?
Yeah.
Or
And
you? Yeah.
You can be so cerebral as a person, but put you in front of the right piece of art, and then it's like you have this like emotional response in your body, and you're like, what's going on? And you try to find like what it is. And sometimes we have the language and sometimes we don't. I mean, we're humans. We don't have like, the most precise vocabulary all of the time to like access what we're really trying to say. And I think that art is it's the only medium that really kind of like transverses all of the senses where it's like
Yeah.
it hits everywhere. And I think that as humans, we need to be like sensory sensorily involved in order to like maintain our connection to our humanity and like the human condition.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with you. I don't know what to say after that. Hey, film. I want to talk about film, or a little like a wrinkle of a thought here again. My when we started talking about photography, Jim, film, of course, that idea of photographs, many photographs combined together, obvious connection between the two. But I ended up finding that, some of the big directors for me, and the ones that I adored, had so many incredible photos in their film or shots. I'm thinking Kubrick, Tarkovsky, um, just off the top of my head, of where it's not just the film itself and how beautiful the film can be. It's that there are these striking images that are
Yeah.
singular within it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where there's this such strong connection where I'm like, yes, it's something about the photographer's mind, and those, when they capture it, the directors, and Coppola, like you said, the same type of thing. Do you think about it in that same type of way of maybe you go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely feel like sometimes when I'm watching a movie and I'll see like a shot and I'm like, oh, they're setting this up so beautifully. And then it's like the camera kind of pauses for a second. It's almost still as the way a photograph would be. I'm like, I know what they were doing there. And I think a lot of times for me, even when I'm doing photography, I try to incorporate a little bit of movement
Yeah.
because I want it to kind of feel like that moment in the movie where it is a picture, but it's also a movie. So it's moving and there's like a rhythm to it.
I wanted to ask you about modeling. So you're the subject, right? You're the subject, in this case. What is the experience for you as a creator, or the interactivity? It's an open question because, like,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know. So you're the subject now, and what do you do within that space to create some of the effects that you talk about that you like, or how much you're part of that?
For me, it's kind of about like getting into a creative like flow where it's kind of like I lose a bit of my internal dialogue and I kind of move into this like mind body connection where it's kind of like I count on muscle memory to be able to like, make the small adjustments that really make a picture pop. So it's like lock your knees, pose this way, like chin a little bit down, stuff like that. I think it's kind of something where it's like the more you practice and the more it can just become an unconscious thing for you, the more authentic your photos will look because it's really just about like teaching yourself. And when you're in that, it's like you're dancing. You kind of just like go with the flow and sort of try to forget that you're in a body, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It does make sense. I every 2 or 3 weeks try to get out dancing for a long stretch of time, and it's it's
Yeah.
moving out of the body, or out of the mind, or into what's occurring uh,
Yeah.
in the scene. Yeah,
I feel like a lot of modeling is kind of like that. And it's like also you are sort of dancing with you and the photographer. It's kind of like you guys have to be able to, I mean, obviously you can verbally instruct each other and kind of be like, okay, I want, a little bit more sass from you. I want a little bit of a pout in this shot and look this way. But at the same time, I think it's much more fluid if you guys can kind of become symbiotic, where it's like you're not really speaking, but you guys are both sharing a vision
Yeah.
and you're doing your parts together, but you're not like, okay, do this, do that, where it becomes like rigid. And I think that a lot of times for me, I found that the more comfortable you can make your subject, just the more authentic you'll get of like their own expression and the way that, they shine their light and their talent and their beauty. And that's something I really strive for as a photographer, is to make my subjects comfortable, because I know how uncomfortable it can be to be the model and be in a situation where you feel like you don't have like autonomy in that way.
Yeah. And, power dynamics, vision of what you would like to do, comfort, different idea, and employer, like all these type of interplays and um uh jumping around a bit, which is super to me. I want to go back to one of the questions I tend to ask a
Mhm.
little bit earlier, but I'm always really curious. Was there a moment you said you saw yourself as an artist? When did you see yourself as an artist?
I don't think I ever had like one singular moment. But I do think for me, while I was an undergrad, I studied creative writing. And so there was like the same aspect of where an artist can have like a little bit of imposter syndrome. And when people would ask, I'd be like, oh, I'm an aspiring writer. I take these classes, that kind of thing. But I like just, in conversation with my peers, started to just ask, like, well, what makes a writer? Like, what are my standards of what a writer is? And how does it compare to what everyone else is saying? And that's kind of when I realized that if you write, you're a writer. And it can be as simple as that. It doesn't have to be like a convoluted, um, like achievement that comes when you're published and when all these other things happen, when you get accolades. And I think I just kind of like took that mentality and applied it to all of the other things that I do. But yeah, I guess that maybe my moment was in undergrad.
Yeah, moving more into it. I find it such a fascinating, it's like identity questions, right?
Mm,
And some guests are like, yeah, born into this world, I don't know. This is my freak flag ever since I was, like I am just
yeah.
doing my own thing. And that's great too, it's just
Yeah,
kind of when
definitely.
um and I think I'm also interested too when it happens, because for me it happened much later. I've always been artistically bent or sensitive. But for so long in my head, I had this gulf between the artist out there. I was an art enthusiast of others and wasn't really looking at my own creativity of being like, hey, like from your side too, which was there. It's just I hadn't seen it. I'd
Yeah.
seen an otherness to it, right? Thank you, great artists, for entertaining me, thrilling me, all these type of things. And so that integration process for me has been more recent and very liberating. But like you said, a singular moment, I myself can't really, it's just like you get into it. And for you, it's around conversations about when you find out there isn't that much space between it's kind of the language that you're using. This person's a writer and like I'm doing that, or like I'm a
Yeah.
writer. I'm writing. Like I'm a writer.
Exactly. I think for me it was a little bit similar to your story in that like I did not really see myself in that way, because I was just like, oh, well, look at all of this beautiful art and look at all of these like talented people. And I just like didn't see what I could contribute in a way that would deem me as being like not their equal, but like in the same category, I would say.
Yeah,
And I think sometimes that's like an iceberg that kind of takes a long time to melt, depending on who you are.
yeah, yeah. Um, Photographers, you lose your mind over.
So this is funny. I get this question kind of a lot. And for me, I really love Lee Miller. I think I connect to not only her photos, but just like her story as being, a model and working for Vogue and going off to do like on the ground photojournalism for them
Yeah.
and kind of getting mixed up in the horrors of like World War II and actually photographing it and writing about it and having it published in Vogue at that
Yeah.
time. Just
Yeah.
crazy to think about. And, just sort of a woman ahead of her time. And I think there's so many others that I could name, but just like she's the key figure that comes to mind for me, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. You can have that strong, the you get asked that question. Sometimes it's a strange question when I ask about photographers or I talk to authors. It seems like a standard question, but in the back of my head, I'm always like, who do you freak out? As the artist.
Yeah. I think too, for me, I try and take inspiration and like direction from what's around me. So, like, a lot of what I would say are just people that, I know and like photographers I know in real life and people that I've worked with. And also kind of like just different people that I remember from childhood who weren't necessarily professional photographers, but like, it was a hobby of theirs or just kind of a way that they used to express their own creativity and make memories. And I think just for me, it's like a cornucopia, but I would say Lee Miller is like a central figure in there.
Very cool. Very cool. Have to ask you another kind of question. You like found footage, horror, that type of thing, or is that in your?
Yeah.
I was thinking Super 8. Part of the thing I was thinking on it and asking you that is for me, I like the immediacy of horror film and the different type of ways that it's filmed, in particular, like found footage and Super 8 and that type of like kind of like real documentary type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's this thing in music I really like where if you play a record or like you listen to stuff that was recorded a long time ago, there's like a grittiness and there are these like imperfections, but they just add like a quality to the sound that really um like that really emphasizes it. And I think a lot of the times when it's like a found footage situation or a Super 8 or something like that, I think like all of those imperfections really add to like the story or just like the visual richness of something.
Yeah. No, that's a great way of describing it too, because those extra sounds,
Yeah.
the grittiness that you find. Um, my favorite type of albums, and I know of like two or three types of them, are I'll give you an example. There's this band, Neurosis, metal band. You might be familiar with San Francisco, and they have a side project called Tribes of Neurot, and they released two albums, and one is like kind of metal, like wonderful metal album. The other one's a little bit more, I don't know how to say it, it's maybe like electronic or like more soundscape. And
Uh-huh.
then you play them at the same time and they're the same length and everything, and it creates a third something sound. And
Cool.
yeah, when you mentioned about like the sounds that are on the record of that
Yeah.
grittiness, like there's these kind of overlays I really dig on that too, where like you can hear if you know a vinyl really, really well, and then you hear it on radio, you're like, that's not quite how that song sounds. It sounds a little bit different than that. It sounds like my record, right?
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I actually went to this experience in New York. And it's this old apartment building, and they don't really tell you too much before you go in, but
Mm,
you have to take your shoes off. And it is just entirely powered by sound waves. And there are like kind of mirrors and interesting things like that. But depending on where you are at in the room, like if you're sitting, if you're standing, if you're laying, you will hear something different. Like the frequencies are all aligned in a way so that the way you move through the room depends on like what you're hearing and what you're experiencing. And I think that the album thing you were talking about is like a play on that as well. And it's just so interesting when you're in that space and like to kind of have those things come together and to be able to like manipulate sound in that way is so cool, I think.
yeah, yeah, I like that a lot too. We were chatting about the conceptual question about what art is. Do you feel art has a particular role uh,
Yeah.
in society and what it does for us? What's the role of art?
I think art kind of plays a couple roles. I think that its main objective is to keep humans connected to the human condition and to each other and sense of sense of our souls. And I think also art kind of is supposed to encapsulate the times depending on, what's going on in the world and what isn't going on in the world and what is the same, what will always be the same. And I think art is like the most profound way that we express ourselves. And without it, the world seems a little soulless, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, have that feeling. I found the mystery around or the role is kind of like tends to be in the indescribable or the difficult to describe, like in philosophy,
Yeah.
you know, like I was talking about before, talking a little bit about like the struggle for words to encapsulate, like the ineffable. It's
Yeah. It's intangible. It's just something you're grasping at. It's like beyond the veil kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, beyond the veil. Yes, that's what this podcast is, beyond the veil. Well, that's what we're exploring here. What about the big question then of the show? Since I do the conceptual stuff, why is there something rather than nothing?
Well, I think that if you ask the question, the just in order to question it, it kind of implies the existence of quote unquote something. And I think for me, in terms of my own like philosophical journey, learning about the different, different branches, I think for me, I've never really been a fan of like nihilism. I like to believe in a kind of a more like, I would say like psychological psychology where like Carl Jung talked about the collective unconscious.
Sure.
And I think to me, the collective unconsciousness is proves that there is something rather than nothing. And yeah, that's it. That's me.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I asked that question towards 300 times, and I always love to hear it because it's like, yeah, with the art stuff, it gets absurd too. I mean, I think part of the point is like philosophy for me. Like, I have a weird interpretation of philosophy. Like, for me, philosophy isn't other things except a lot of jokes and a lot of breakdowns and laughter. Like, not necessarily clarity. Like, more of a tool to be like to prompt our head, like to our brains, but not necessarily to like, why is there something rather than nothing? Like, like what, like I've studied it, but I can't speak coherently.
Who can in 2024?
Well, that's true
Yeah,
too. I have proof of that.
experiencing brain rot 24/7.
I have, yeah, that's a whole other topic. All right. So you think a lot about art and love photography and film and such. So tell me about Sofia Coppola and like and why she's like why you mentioned her right off the bat. Like, what's so
Yeah.
important about Coppola?
So for me, I kind of grew up in the suburbs and there is a uniformity to like what you experience growing up at a certain time and where it's like we're all watching the same movies, we're reading the same books, we're dressing the same, we're acting the same. We live in like cookie cutter houses. You know what I mean? There's a lot
Yeah,
of conformity there.
sure.
I think for me, my first experience where I watched something that wasn't like a blockbuster, like uh, really just kind of like a Twilight or like a Harry Potter was I watched The Virgin Suicides when I was in high school.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that movie like really impacted me.
Yeah.
I watched it and rewatched it. And I mean, I still watch it sometimes to this day. But I'd never really kind of thought about film in that way, that it could be,
Yeah.
you know, as like as detailed and as intentional and as narrative driven as the way that her films are. And when I when I really started exploring photography more, I kind of wanted to build my own little worlds in my photos. And I think that's something that she does really well. And I appreciate how like concise some of her dialogue is in her movie, but how, like she to the most minute thing, it'll be something of that period if it's a period film. And or the way that the cinematography of the shot is just really intentional. You can tell that, I think. And I really wanted to kind of be that person where it's like my creative direction is going to be something that is world building, something that is nostalgic for something that maybe you haven't experienced, maybe you have. And yeah, that's my experience with Sofia Coppola.
Oh, I really enjoy that. When you mentioned Virgin Suicides, for me, that one, a lot of different ways to talk about it, but like the music by ear, the soundtrack is
Yeah. She has crazy soundtracks in all of her films. Like
yeah,
with Marie Antoinette, she was like one of the first people to not choose to do like, something that would have been heard at the time or like classical music. And she kind of took it in a different direction. And now it's not like an uncommon practice anymore. But at the time it was very controversial. And I feel like I really appreciate a good soundtrack in a film.
that's I love how you mentioned that. The Virgin Suicides on that nostalgia theme, right? So in seeing now, watching it, like I picked up on the kind of the the young men, the witnesses, right? As a male of them of like watching with adoration and wonder, and like particularly like if you look the one the like the older, the older Lux and the different characters, and like what world are they living in, and like adoring them, and like not getting into all the complications of all that dynamic right there, but it's just
Right.
raw, and that's what it was, and that's what she portrayed, where they're singing odes to them and lamenting their loss, like in such it's such a heavy, beautiful
It really is like
something.
it's like an ode in a way. And I also feel like she depicted them, as these like admirers, but in a way, the way that they shoot it is like they're voyeurs. And I
Yep.
think that's such an interesting thing to think about because I think, especially living in this day and age, like we're
Yeah.
kind of all our own voyeurs. And I really loved ad- the way that she told the story using them watching the girls and
The
their relationships with the girls instead of like you're getting the experience of the girls, the firsthand perspective. I like that it was just through that kind of like flawed narration where it's like not omnipresent. And so it's just
man.
where they're thinking.
Well, and it's in the category of like when you love a devastating movie.
Yeah.
Like, the steamrollers coming at you, and you're like, I know, it's coming. And it'll be done. It'll be done at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that and thinking about film. I just I've been on a at this time of the year, just kind of a film jag at night, getting back late from work and this and that. And having folks in the house and getting some experimental horror and thriller stuff and things like that.
Yeah.
It's just so fun.
Such a
So,
great watch movies right now.
oh, isn't it like, I don't
Yeah.
know, it's like September 1st. We're declaring nowadays, maybe you're the same, just declaring September 1st on just like, let's freak out.
Yeah, that's fall. Like it's time for film, it's time for shows. I love to do a rewatch of like Sopranos this time of year and just kind of like get into all of my favorite like noir movies. I just think there's something really fun about like when it gets dark early and you're watching something and it's kind of cold outside and there's kind of nothing you can do other than just be locked in and thinking about it and noticing things that you might not have noticed before.
Yeah. You mentioned Sopranos to Volante. Forget about it, right? I mean, geez, come on. Love that. Bessa, Tell us like where we find your stuff. Like I was lucky enough to encounter it and for us to be able to chat on my show, but like
Yeah.
what do folks do to find you and your creativity, your work, you?
So right now you can find me on Instagram at Besa Shoots Film. I am in the process of upgrading, and there will be a little more to come where you can kind of buy prints and book me in a better atmosphere, in a better environment. Yeah, right now I'm just on Instagram and enjoying every moment, making new connections and putting myself out there. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Besa Tetova. So it's been really great to chat with you. And hail to photography, right? Like uh
Yeah,
it didn't destroy the beautiful art of painting as many thought that it would and developed on its own. But I got to tell you, out of this too, thinking a lot about that stuff. I want to see. I got to go see if I can track down that Super 8 and maybe share some clips of that because
you should.
I know it's so in my brain and the way it's in my brain. Like I said, I think because it was the sensory thing, it was the sound of the reels, the smell of the thing running through,
Yeah,
and like there's like these scenes where I know I exactly what I do exactly right at that moment, like when I'm uncomfortable and I'm on film and I do some little quirky type of thing, and I'm like so tiny, and I'm like it's it. I get to see that. That's the one thing that's captured, and so, anyways, great film. Um, Wonderful work, Bessa. That's why I wanted to chat with
yeah,
you and to talk about photography and film, and really enjoyed the chat. And we get to collaborate or something together somehow, sometime. Try to build a community with the show, and um,
absolutely. If I ever find myself in your neck of the woods with a Super 8,
then we'll have two or three Super 8s there. You know what's good on the Super 8? Maybe we'll end on that. Um, One of the better places to get a Super 8 to get film and to maybe have it processed is in Portland, Oregon, because I've explored it all. It's
wow.
there's
Okay,
there's a spot or two. There's a spot or two you can buy Super 8 film off the shelf.
I'm writing this down.
I'll send you the links. And I'd imagine that even in a place like Portland, a few dozen of folks like us would be like, I want to buy that color Super 8 right off the shelf for. I wouldn't want to look at the price tag, but
That's none of my business.
it it exists.
Yeah.
Beth, a great chatting with you. Thanks for coming out to Something Rather Than Nothing.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here.
All right. I'll be in touch.
Alrighty.
Bye now.
Bye.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.
And listeners, to stay connected with us and our guests, visit somethingratherthannothing.com. Join our mailing list for exclusive updates and access to guest-created art. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast platform. People really read that shit. Your support helps us reach more listeners and spread our community across the planet. This is a global show, and we like to give a shout out to our many listeners across the world, including many listeners in Canada, Spain, Germany, UK, Argentina, Brazil, India, Thailand, and so many more places. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Something Rather Than Nothing Podcast for behind the scenes content. And the best way to help the show is to tell your friends about us. If you love it, they'll love it too. Tell your friends who love it. We love you. This is Something Rather Than Nothing podcast.